Hi again, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Pejman again. I am the founder of this very small startup, Touca.io. This is our landing page. Just to give you a sense of how small we are. This is just me. I just left my job 4 months ago, and I'm working on basically turning this product that we are using as an internal tool at the company I was working at, which originally started as a side project of mine, into a product. The reason I'm giving this call today is we just released our Node.js SDK or JavaScript SDK that allows software engineers to actually submit test results from JavaScript code bases. But you'll get a better understanding of how, this when you see how, what our product is. So before I dive deep into our demo, I'm just going to give a little backstory of how Touca started. So I was working as a software engineer at a medical software company. We were working on a 6 million line of code base. And of course, this was a medical software company. So when we heard that we are supposed to refactor 500,000 lines of code and rewrite one of the lower level components of our software, no one was pleased. I was part of a small team who actually took on this challenge of rewriting that code. But it was very painful because every time we made a code change, we had to go basically wait on our test engineers to test our software, which was a medical software, with lots of test cases, lots of inputs, just to make sure that we're not breaking our software. So I started this idea of basically creating a tool to help developers to actually see the side effects of their code changes as they're writing code. The idea is when you're writing code, we are going to basically take your code changes and then remotely run, basically select the test cases that are relevant to the code change that you're making, and then run them remotely, and then give the feedback back to your editors. So that's basically the vision that I have for Touca. But we're not there yet. We are basically right now more of a continuous integration service. So because this is only a lightning talk, I'm just going to now dive into a demo and show you how our current product works, and basically use the Touca SDK to show you how that works. But since again this is a lightning demo, my main objective here is to get you motivated enough to go explore more of what Touca is, and actually, check out this Touca JS SDK that we just released. So I'm not trying to sell. Just getting feedback from you would be a great, milestone for us. Our JS SDK is very early stage, so there's a lot that we can improve based on your feedback. All right, so let me show you the product now. This is what we have. Imagine this is testing a workflow that is a profile database. It takes username of students and provides basic information about them. You see here on the left side that this page is showing basically an overview of how our software evolves in terms of behavior. Like these are different versions of that same software, and we're just we're just tracking the differences between each version and then showing those, visualize those. On the right side, we have performance differences in different versions. It basically tries to give a sense of how our software is getting slower or faster over time. The idea here is when engineers are writing code, there are actually in any software workflows that are really important for us to test. Which is often the workflow is might be very complex, might be very large. So writing unit tests for individual functions is actually a great idea, but you can't just write a unit test to test a video compression algorithm and just pass a video as input and have expected values as a binary representation of your output video. So in those types of workflows, Touca tries to help by basically allowing engineers to describe the behavior and performance of their software by capturing values of variables and runtime of functions.
And then we are going to, basically our SDKs are going to submit this information to the Touca server, which right now is at app.touca.io, or it can be a self-hosted server, where the server takes care of comparison of those results and that description against a previous result of a trusted version, a version of the code that we know works. And it just notifies developers when there are changes that they need to take care of. So basically, they can come here, take a look. This page, for instance, is comparing version 5 against version 2, and these are test cases. So I see that this one is different. I can click on it and see the values of variables that I captured for this version and how they, compare against this version 2, which is my baseline. So similarly, like if there are functions whose runtime is of interest to me, I can actually basically capture them and then submit to the platform. So if there are if these results are expected and the differences that I see is actually expected, then as a software engineer, I can say, hey, because our product requirements changed, behavior of this version has changed, and that is what we want. So we can promote this version to be a new baseline of our code. We can just, write a comment maybe for our other team members to let them know why they're doing this. And then the platform immediately starts comparing this version against the new baseline, which happens to be version 5. So if I go back, version 5 is shown with the star to indicate that it's the new baseline of my code. Okay, so that's how basically, I hope that this gives you an idea of how Touca works. But what I want to do now is to actually just show you the JavaScript SDK of it. Here, I am going to start with a very small, simple example called is prime. So I'm going to switch to basics. I created a suite called basics. The platform gives me an API key and an API URL. And here, this is, imagine, is our code under test, the software you want to test. And in this case, it's a pretty simple one. It just takes a number, determines if it's a prime number or not. Now, you can, of course, write a unit test for it. We all know how to do that. We hit this function with different test cases, and we explicitly hard code the expected values for different inputs. But with Touca, we basically approach this in a fundamentally different way. We say, let's not use basically a specified explicit set of inputs, and let's not use expected outputs either. We just say we're going to write a workflow. Here, I'm just doing that with Touca workflow, and I'm just going to call it is prime test, and then say whenever I get a test case, which is of a form string always in Touca, I'm going to, basically, I know that it would be a number, so I'm going to parse it as a number. And then I'm going to call my, code under test, which in this case is prime, with that number, whatever that is. Maybe it's, 2 or 15 or whatever. But then when I get back the return value of that function, I'm going to add that as a result so that Touca can track it between different versions. And that's basically it. So this is a very simple Touca test that we can write for this function, which is very simple. If you ask, probably in this case, if we are not doing anything too complicated in our is prime check, then writing a unit test is just fine. We don't need to use Touca. But this example just wants to give you some idea of how this works. So, okay, now I wrote the code. I can go basically copy this API key and then say, I want to set it as an environment variable. I'm going to do the same for API URL and set it as an environment variable. Then I'm going to basically call I've already built this code. So I'm just going to go run the JS file for its TypeScript file, and then basically call this version 1 of my is prime code. So I'm saying I want to test version 1 of my code. And then here with Touca, we can pass a list of test cases from a file or we can pass them by a command line argument. So let's just test 15, 17, 91. So when I run this test, the SDK is going to pass these numbers into my workflow and then run this function, take the value of the isPrime function, and then basically submit it to the Touca server. So if I now go back to the server, you see that version 1 is logged and we have all these test cases here. Now, this is a very simple example. So what I'm going to do is to switch to this other example. I want to do the same thing, but for a more complicated example. So here, imagine we have a parse profile function. It's some parse profile function that takes a username, gives a student object or type, which has this username, full name, date of birth, and GPA. These are different types, of course, but the SDK is going to preserve the values in binary, basically in their original type, and serialize them into binary so that we don't lose their type. Now, let me switch to this other example. And then what I'm going to do is to just basically run this test just as I did before. This time, however, by the way, I need to update I think this is called JavaScript. Yeah, this is called JavaScript. So I'm updating the API URL. And then here, I'm going to just run the same test. So students test, call it again version 1. And then I'm going to pass a test cases file. Do I have this test case file? I think I have. Let's see this. Okay. Actually, okay. I don't know where I stored this test case file. Okay, so let's do the same thing and then pass them as environment variable as command line arguments. So I'm just going to call my parse profile function for which we have this test with different test cases. Now, the difference here is I'm calling my parse profile function, but I'm basically capturing the runtime of this function. Or when I get the student, I'm basically capturing all these different values of it. So I can run this test, and then I'm going to do one small change in my implementation of the code under test. So let's just change, the date of birth of this particular student. Of course, the thing that happens in the real world is we change the implementation of this function. But I just want to give you an idea of now that we changed the code. Of course, I need to basically build this example again. And then, so because I'm writing JavaScript, I'm just running TypeScript here, the compiler, and then running this again. This time, I don't even need to pass my test cases anymore because the platform already has, keeps track of the test cases that we've submitted. So all I'm going to say is I made some changes. Here's a new version of my code. I'm calling it version 2. This might be a Git hash or whatever we want to name our code. So we passed version 2, but we made some changes. So we expect to see some differences. And while we're waiting, I want to just tell you about the fact that I'm actually adding some runtime values here as well. So these metrics are essentially like performance benchmarks of different parts of our code that we can see. So if I oh, by the way, did I run the test? Okay. This is a live demo course, I guess. I ran the code, but am I? I'm sorry. So just bear with me a second. I am going to. Okay. Breadcrumbs, right? I just want to make sure that I'm building the changes that I made to that student's code.
which I did make the changes. So I did expect some differences. Okay, this is taking longer, which I think is good because perhaps it shows that it's actually building stuff. So let's go ahead and I'm going to switch back to that examples directory and then run the same code. This time I'm just going to call it version 3. Let's see if there are differences showing up here. If not, then this is a really bad demo of the product, which doesn't seem like, yeah, it's working.
No, it's okay. I just have to pause you real quick. We're running
Yes,
a little bit into
absolutely.
our,
I know.
so we might have to
just
wrap
wanted
it
to
up
wrap it up.
in a couple minutes.
Yeah. Anyway, so yes. Okay. So the idea, however, for this, it was to show you that there are differences showing up. So this is totally not working as expected. But the difference here is if you have, say, multiple stages in our code under test, then instead of just running some integration test and saying, hey, when we give this input, we expect at the end of our workflow to see that output, we can add these functions that I showed you in between our, our production code. Now, the Touca SDK is designed to actually not basically capture anything, and it has no impact to the performance and behavior of our software when we are shipping our software, when we are releasing it in production code. But then when we are testing it, they just you work as hooks and capture values of variables from within our code under test. So overall, the complexity of our test remains just as you see here. Just call the test without any specifying any test cases, and then we get the capture values and show them there. I'm really sorry that this is a live demo bug though. Yeah, I encourage you to see the examples in the example directory of the Touca JS repo on GitHub. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks so much. Because we are running a little bit low on time, we're gonna, we don't unfortunately have time for questions, but I'm sure you can reach out and with any questions. So please put your contact info in the chat. Absolutely. Thanks again for coming by. Awesome, cool. So we'll move into our main presentation for the night. Michael, would you like to take the wheel?
Sure. I'll go ahead and take over here. And just so I am aware as well, what kind of timeline are we looking at for the rest of the evening?
Let's see. I think the plan is we're good till about 7:30. Is usually the general plan. How does that sound?
Okay, and then yeah, so I'll aim to be done and ready for questions at 7:30. If people want to stick around and talk about anything, we can. Yeah. Otherwise, sounds good to me.
Perfect.
And
thanks so much.
I will be doing some live coding as well. So hopefully Pejman got all the bad luck out of the way there with the demo, and I don't have the same case. Last time I did this, there was a point where I had to copy and paste from my repository because it just wasn't working. And last night when I practiced it, I had a plural version of a word. And I sat there for like 5 minutes. It was like, what the heck am I doing wrong? And I was like, oh, I did values instead of value. So it's crazy how those things can happen. So I'm going to be presenting off of Figma here to start with my slides, because that was where I was at while I was doing this. Just felt like I reached for Figma because I've been out of any sort of presentation software for a while. I'm Michael Leners. I'm going to be presenting on React context state management. This actually started on just a talk on React context, and then through that I researched Redux, and that went down a whole rabbit hole because it turns out Redux has come a long way since I last looked at it. So we'll see how far we get. I think I shared with the organizers here that last time, like, there's a lot of content here, a lot in the repository for us to dive into, but we'll probably only get to a certain point and then call it quits. But I'll give an overview as we go along of different things. So hopefully there'll be a good breadth. I know that a lot of you turned off your cameras, and that's okay, you know, if you don't want to show yourself for the recording or whatnot, but it is nice sometimes to see some sort of feedback or acknowledgement. Also, I might do some show of hands moments, so you can raise your hand, or you can also unmute if I ask a question in general and you want to participate or give your perspective. I'm always down to hear what other people think and their experiences. Again, I'm Michael Leners. I'm a web developer here at Hy-Vee down in Des Moines. You guys might have a few of them up there in Minnesota. Hopefully not causing you too much pain with their services. I really like working there. I feel like it's a pretty innovative environment here in Des Moines. I transitioned into web development in 2018 from education. I was teaching physics and physical science, and then my contract didn't get renewed with that at the university and needed to do something. And web development seemed like a really great idea. Glad I have, because I love learning. I love teaching. There's just so much to learn in this field, which it sounds like a lot of you are discovering. And I also love teaching, which is why I'm here. I love sharing knowledge. And you know, I've been doing some courses lately, been looking at how to refactor things at our application at Hy-Vee. And I wanted to share kind of what I've put together for my team. Also, user experience is really important to me, including developer experience, which is what we're going to be looking at here with a lot of these different APIs, is like, how easy is it to use it in your application? So that will be something we touch on with Redux and what they've come along with. We already talked about my dog. You guys saw her, Dahlia, here. Hopefully she didn't hear me. I'm also a plant dad. This is a terrarium here that has since, you might be able to see it back there, since the plants have died. That was a little bit of unfortunate. These guys are still going strong outside though. These guys might have been harvested already. Yeah, they've really taken off. I got like a pandemic focus on growing plants and gardening a little bit too much. And this is my husband here. We went to a different orchid workshop, which we do have one orchid flower still alive. So we're hoping for resurgence of those. We'll see. So yeah, let's go ahead and dive into the talk. So the game plan, I want to give you an overview of state management, why it's important, why it's so difficult. I want to talk about Redux as an example of like rigorous state management approach, and discuss prop drilling and some simple code examples. Discuss Formic, which is kind of left field for this talk. It is somewhat of a state management solution, form management solution. It's something that my team uses, and is why I included it here, because we're trying to detangle our states. Not included here is also GraphQL Apollo, which has some state management solution with its rigorous caching layer. So we're kind of all across the board between Redux, prop drilling with hooks, and Formic and GraphQL Apollo. So we're trying to unify our approach. So that's kind of what the breadth of this talk is going to be about. I want to start out here with a quote from Kenzie Dodds. You might hear about him a few times throughout this talk. This quote, "Managing state is arguably the hardest part of any application." And I think we've all probably felt the pain of state management at some point, where you're like, this changed here and this needs to find out way over here in the application, or even the state management syncing between the UI and the API, or you need to remember when you refresh the page what is happening. So that type of state management issues. So if it's not clear already, what is state management? Basically, it's a state at which the application currently resides, as well as the memory that is stored for that application. So like, how is the state actually managed, not just what is the state? So is the modal open or closed? Has the user filled out the form? Are they submitting? Did they hit the submit button? Is the menu or submenu open or closed? Is it light mode versus dark mode? And that last example is one where when you refresh the page, most users expect that that state persists. If you were in dark mode on a website, you'd want it to stay dark mode. Whereas the other, not so much. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into Redux. I just remembered I wanted to share this Figma diagram. So let me do that real quick, in case you wanted to hop around to what I'm sharing with you. Okay, so Redux for state management. Redux kind of came out of a very difficult time in state management. I was not around when there was this event-driven state management, but it was a lot of like this model changed. Therefore, like I trigger an event, this user update changed, and then it propagated events down the line. And there was a lot of chaos in state management. And Redux kind of was like, or Flux pattern was what it was based off of, came in as a centralized application. Maybe later, a centralized way of dealing with state management. So all of your state is managed in a single store. The only way to change state is to emit an action, and then that action trickles down to your reducer, which combines your current state with that action. So let's take a look at what that would look like here in this application example, where we have a UI where you can make a deposit, and you say, I want to emit an event that's depositing a certain amount of money. There's an action that says, go ahead and dispatch a deposit of $10. And then that dispatch goes to the store, and the store says, okay, you're depositing $10. I have a state of $0. $10 added to $0 gives me $10. Let me go ahead and tell the UI, okay, UI, you now have $10 rather than $0. So this is a one-way data flow. It's built on immutability of the state. You only update the state by dispatching an event, and then that state gets updated in the reducer, and then the UI gets told, hey, this state has been updated. So that's very important. For the Redux flow, you'll get in trouble and errors thrown if you try and mutate state directly. The only way that you can update that state is via dispatching an event. So is there any questions on that, or where we've come so far? Is there any opinions on Redux out there? Do we like it? Does anybody use it currently?
I don't use it right now, but I did at my last position. And there's definitely there are definitely great use cases for Redux, but I don't use it in my current position. But also don't have to manage as much state, to be honest. There's not as much going on. So I don't think I would ever include it in it's too much for my project that I'm working on right now. But I have I do kind of have a soft spot for it in my heart, I guess.
Yeah, because it's a rigorous platform that works really well in some cases. And it does a good job. So some of the drawbacks, maybe, this is why my summary of it. It's great. It's really cumbersome. Does anyone have this situation where you've had 10 tabs open because you're going between action types and action creators and reducers and just trying to trickle down where things are happening? So it's a lot. I think it was what I heard.
I remember teaching my team many years ago React and Redux at the same time, and common questions were like, why do we have to write like 400 lines of code to add a new endpoint to our app and pull data from it, and like, what does all this mean? And then yeah, I remember seeing it's not so much event driven, but if actions were created or events were created as this is what this event means, like update or like set the value, versus the action is they like went to the next, like it's not a user driven, and so you end up just dispatching a ton of stuff all at the same time, and it just is it can be a chaotic mess. So it's very much kind of like pattern driven, and everything is split apart, but it's almost very verbose at that point. Cumbersome. You said it right.
Yeah, to the point where it actually suppresses sort of learning about the underlying concepts, right? You have the separation of concerns in actions and reducers and thunks or sagas or whatever you're dealing with in the Redux code. And junior developers who onboard through that very quickly learn that those first few days where you learned what those things are all about, you basically just throw all that away and you follow the very narrow pattern that exists in the software. And years later, you challenge those same developers, like, why did you write the reducer in this way? And they're basically, the answer is always the same, because that's how all the other reducers are written. So I just followed the pattern.
Yeah, it's great. Like there's 2 podcasts that I give here at the resources. Since it comes up right now, this Redux is definitely not dead from changelog. Is really great because Mark is now the current maintainer of Redux with Redux Toolkit, and it's come a long ways for those that only know that really difficult pattern that we're talking about, or cumbersome pattern that we're talking about, where you can really clean up your files, but that pattern that you're talking about that everybody just did was what was in the docs and wasn't required for the way that the architecture was needed to be created. And I think Dan Abramoff was the original creator of Redux, and he was just like, I didn't think that everybody would do it the way I said in the docs. I thought they just take that as an example and go along their happy way with and do it the way they want. But everybody did follow that, and it's a pattern that's stuck. And yeah, I was the lead. I was the one that everybody went to on one of my teams for Redux, and even preparing for this talk, it took me a really long time to remember all those patterns again. And I was pleasantly surprised with this toolkit, which hopefully we'll get to briefly at the end of what that is. If you don't know, you could check out this link and see what it is now, where you can create without all those action types and action creators. It's pretty cool. So let's go ahead and continue on here with this content. We're gonna go ahead and look at some prop drilling. So this is another mode of state management, maybe pattern, not really the most sophisticated, but basically you pass data through React components by passing it down through the component tree. You could pass state objects, you could pass methods to alter state, you could pass actions and helpers to alter state. It's great for simple cases, but it's pretty hard to scale and can get really cumbersome because you have to push up your state to the top level to reach down to cousin and all these far-reaching components. So it's hard to scale, and Redux as well as React context are good solutions for it. Simple example here that we'll go over shortly in code is having an app with 2 components, a character form and a character component. We're using use state here, a React hook that basically passes the state value and the function to set that state value. So down here, you could see where we pass set character into the character form. When we change this input, we set that character value. And then we also pass these props down to the character component, where we can see the character's name, and we have a button to clear the character's name. and that clears the character's name. That's basically what this is doing here. This is the character component and clearing the character name from the character input button. What that looks like, this little diagram that I've created, is we have that app component. We're passing down these props to these other components and allowing them to manage the state independently in those child components. We can get to more complicated examples with Redux, or not Redux, Formic here. Formic, like I said, is kind of like state management for forms. It also comes with lots of great validation and error handling. And it also has good form submissions. Example of using Formic here, you just input Formic. There's a few different ways to do it. You use the Formic tag and you pass in its initial values. So I call this the state swap party, kind of, where you're like, here, I'm managing the state, here, Formic, you take the state and manage it. And then you can do things with Formic to update it, and then you could on submit do certain things. So our more complicated example, which is going to be still off of our character form, we're going to have this state swap party in the character form component, and then we're going to just have a lot more fields on the form. And instead of using character and set character from useState, we're going to go ahead and use values and handle change from Formic, which are Formic props, to update the values. And then when we click on submit, we're going to call set character and pop back up to my state management, and then it'll propagate up to our character form. And then the third level that we'll look at is React context. So React context provides a way to pass data to components directly without having to pass down via props. If you've worked with Redux, you might realize that this is something that Redux also provides for you. So if all you're looking to do is to pass state directly and you don't need to worry about state management, you can just use React context alone. However, it's not a state management solution on its own. You'll want to use another hook or another state management solution alongside with context and pass that state management solution directly to where you want to use it. So it's very extensible with other solutions. And in terms of React, it's come a long ways, and it's used a lot. That was one of the moments where I realized that I was doing something like in the right direction for my team, was when I realized that we were prop drilling all the things from Formic I showed here. We were prop drilling values and set values and all these Formic props. We were prop drilling them all. But then I discovered that Formic has this use Formic context hook that lets you use the context to get those values without having to prop drill them. So that was really nice. And it has worked out really well for us, where we're like, thank goodness we don't have like 30 lines, because each prop is on a new line. And so you have like lines and lines and lines of props being passed to your components, and it just kind of driving us mad. So any questions here before we dive into some code? I've given a quick overview here of these things.
No, but let's comment. Those diagrams are great. Showing the flow of the data.
Good.
Nice.
Yeah, I love making diagrams. It's a weird passion. I'm glad they're helpful. All right, so let's hop in. So I'll go ahead and give out this code base to the repository. And the repository has the Figma link, as well as these resources available. And you could go ahead and clone it and check out the branch names. And these are the branch names that, you know, we'll probably not make it all the way to, but at least I gave these first four I think, are the ones that have diagrams associated with them. And then Redux and Reducer is probably going to be another day conversation, but they're there for you to check out. So let's start with this simple example and get us primed for using context. So here we have this simple character. Let me zoom in here. There we go. Okay, hopefully that's big enough for you guys to see. So we're prop drilling this character and set character, and we don't want to do that. So we're gonna use create context and use context. And we're gonna create a context called character context. And you could pass in a default value for what you want to pass down as your context. But typically you want to give a provider where you give the value of the context that you want to pass in. And here I just want to pass in exactly what I have there for my state management solution, this array of character set character, so that instead of passing down my character form, or sorry, my character and set character as props here, in my character form, I can return, gonna make this have a return value. I can pass in and see here it's saying, I don't know what character is. And if I check out my application, it'll be like, I don't know what character and set character are. So let's go ahead and bring in character and set character from this context. We just go ahead and define what we want our character and set character, deconstructing that values that we're passing in. And instead of use state, we're going to use context. And the context that we're bringing in is the character context. So this should fix our application here. So to go through again, what's happening is we're creating this context, and then we're saying the value of the context is this key value, or not key value pair, this array. And I'm going to get the value of that context when I call use context with that context. I know I said context a lot there, but hopefully that's clear. Is there any questions about that? Then we get out that character and set character. And so this is all working hunky-dory here again with my character component and my character input and my character component. And then we can go ahead and do the same thing here with my character component. I don't want to pass these values as props. Always remember to go and delete your props where you pass them into, because React won't tell you you forgot it, unless you're using prop types and or TypeScript, I guess. We have not made it there quite yet. Then we have character and set character here, and everything should be working as expected. So that goes ahead and clears up our prop drilling here. Again, any questions or thoughts before we dive into a more complicated multi-file example?
I guess my only question is, like, a friend of mine once said, like, Redux is cool because it's got like good tooling around it. Does this have any, like, I don't know, if I haven't really tried context React dev tools. Are there any? That's my question.
Not like Redux, no. There is a certain tool, there's a certain like debug ability that you can do. You can give custom hooks a name, or certain contexts a name, so you can track their values in the dev tools. But I forget the specifics around that, but I would say no, that's probably a trade-off with going with something like this.
Thanks.
If anybody else knows of anything.
I'm not 100%. You might be able to see the value of a context in a component that uses it. in the React DevTools, but
Yeah.
I'm not 100%.
Yeah, that's how I use it
Yeah.
too. I'm able to use the React DevTools, but
Yeah.
what you miss is the action logging that you might recall from Redux.
Right. And you'd be able to like replay things, right? With
Yeah,
Redux.
that's all missing from
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, so you can see the context and the values, but I can't go through and look at previous actions and stuff like that. Yeah. Cool, good question. Right, there's like a million ways to skin the cat with these things. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and check out a prop drilling example. Again, this is that more complicated example where we're gonna have a whole object here for the character, and we're going to pass character and set character to our character form. We're going to pass that. We're going to swap out with formic and pass in initial values and pass it on down to our lower components. So this is my character having some key value pairs here on this object as my initial. You pass into use state an initial value that you want for your states. We pass it into the character form. And then this is where the character and set character go ahead. We set the initial values for formic as character. So everywhere we have values here, this is going to be the character form that uses the initial value. And then on submit, we go ahead and when I click that submit button here on my form, it goes ahead. So I'm typing here in the form and nothing is happening over here on the character because it's still in formic land. When I hit submit, it's going to go ahead and set character and it's going to go and update the state on my side of state management. So to use context here, we're going to go ahead and create our context like we did before. We're going to say character context again and not give it a value because we're going to provide that value. This is where I typed values when I was practicing this instead of value, and I was getting an error, and it was that gross React error. It was like, cannot render an object as a component. It's like, I don't know, and it's like top level app.js that's like blows up. So this added it to the provider, but I'm still prop drilling, so not really much is happening. I can break this by getting rid of the prop drilling here. And it'll be like, what? I can't get these values. So here in the character form, we can go ahead and I'm gonna bump this over so it's not as gross here on the right. Bring in use context here. Oh. And again, return. Well, those are reversed. Okay. Return, we are going to do const that character, set character equals use context. And now if you remember last time, a use context was the context that I defined in that file. I'm just going to delete these real quick. Now I defined context at a top level file here, so I need to export that so I can bring in that context. You know, as you mature in this, you probably will want to define your context somewhere else than your app component. But just for simplicity, that's where I'm putting this. So we have character context from app.js, and that is going to be the context that we're using here. And bada boom, bada bing, we're back in business. And so we could do the same thing with our character form. It's the only other place where we're prop drilling this character context. Let's go ahead and get our character component. I don't know why I use the file tree instead of a file search. We can use context equals, oh, no. We're bringing in the character, set character as a use context. And then we want that same. Does anybody have a good auto import? Because like, is it going to pick it up? Oh, it picked it up. I swear, VS Code very rarely, like, I use JetBrains at work and it like picks up the imports and I'm like, come on, VS Code. And I look for extensions, but I haven't found a good one that does auto imports well. Okay, gripe over. So we can get rid of this character and set character. It's now being pulled in from our use context, and I need to define, import my use context from React. All right, so everything is working there too. So again, what I'm doing here is replacing my prop drilling with direct use of context. With this provider, this context is providing values directly by using context. No more prop drilling there. But you might be asking, Michael, what about where you keep on prop drilling all these values and handled change from formic? Isn't that kind of gross? Can you create a context for that too? And I will tell you that you don't need to create a context for that because formic gives you context for free. So like in this example, abilities doesn't even care about this. This is just straight prop drilling. I just pass straight through here to show that example that ability input is what cares about the values and handled change, but abilities input doesn't care about these props. It's just passed straight through. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like to replace some of this prop drilling with use format context. So let's start here. It really is just use formic context. Yeah. All right, now that I complained about it, it's gonna auto import for me. So it's not apples. Whatever we get from content or from formic, which is a lot of different things. You could check their docs. There's lots of different values, handle change, handle submit, all these things that we piped in here from formic we can get from context. There's lots of like, there's submit count and there's a lot of different things that formic offers you. Anything that you can get at the top level, you can get from formic context. And there we go. We should still be in business here. Sweet. Let's go ahead and fix it here too. Remember here, this abilities, we don't care about all this. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove all this. And then here in our ability input, I'm gonna go ahead and remove these three. The name we still want because the name is this, strength, dexterity, custody, all these fields. We want that prop to be passed down to make these ability inputs different. But we don't care about these values and handled change because it's the same prop that's being passed down over and over again. And we can go ahead and use formic context to pull those in as well. And just I'm going to show them, I'm not pulling a fast one. So here we don't have values or handle change anymore. Go ahead and uncomment. And the application's happy again. So like I said, this is where like I felt like, okay, if a modern framework for handling forms, one that my team reached for and vetted out, before I joined, like If something like this is using it, then I think it's probably a useful thing. There's patterns that you can adopt, because right now this is like exporting character context and you have to import that everywhere. And it really would be nice that if I just could use maybe like something like a custom hook, not have to import use context. And so that's what you'll see. And I'll just pull down the branch since we're getting close here to 7:30. Check out, I think it's called use character. Okay, so use character, you'll notice here in the app component, there's just this character provider. And that's imported from use character context. And then in character form, instead of use context here, we just have use character. And use character, it's not use context. We're not having to pass it the context. We're not having to import the context. Really, as the user of this custom hook that I built, I don't have to worry about the implementation of context. And that's exactly how Formic did it. Like, as a user of Formic, you don't have to worry that they use context under the hood. And basically, all you have to do that, and this is covered over and over again in Ken C. Dodd's Epic React course. You just can create a file here that encompasses all your logic. You create a provider, and that provider instantiates your state management of choice and provides that value. And then you export also a custom hook that uses your context and basically exports your context is basically all that's doing. And then we do a little bit of error handling here saying that, hey, if you try and use this hook outside of a provider, you can't do that because you need to provide it inside the provider, basically. So I'll go ahead and show what happens there. Oh, it needs to be top level. Nice little error. Use character must be used inside a character provider is what happens if you try and use it outside of that provider. So there's ways you can abstract this away to create a nice API for yourself so that you don't have to import context up the yin yang and use context left and right. So that's what we've adopted. There's also similar ways you can create testing. I mean, if you use Redux or styled components or other things, you probably used a provider in your test idea called like testing harness. It's a similar thing you could do in testing. You can have a helper that provides for you and create these nice abstractions around this. I know I jumped there really quick. Is there any question about that abstraction or anything else we've covered so far?
I'll just second that abstraction is awesome, especially with TypeScript. You don't have to type it as undefined or null that I think the default types for context pulls in. So yeah, it's great.
Thanks. All right, so I just want to touch here for Redux. For those that haven't seen it yet, I'm going to go ahead and open my branches just to compare side by side. So I have Redux old school, basically, and Redux using Toolkit. And so you normally have like a Redux folder, right? And you have action types, actions, and a reducer and a store. So your action types, you've probably seen this before, where you have strings hard-coded, and then your actions are creating these return types of these actions. These are actually creators, functions that create these actions. And then you combine your reducer. Sorry, I jumped to the wrong one. You have a reducer, similar format here, like initial state, and a reducer that updates the character, and a reducer that clears the character, similar to what I had in my previous example with use state. And then we combine our reducers into a single reducer, and then we bring our reducer into a store. So this is kind of like the overhead of creating Redux with all these files, and then you use it by connecting, mapping state to props, or mapping dispatch to props. With Redux Toolkit, this simplifies greatly to just 2 files. Instead of all these complex action creators, you basically create what's called a slice, and it's function based rather than, if you look at my reducer here, it's switch case, which, you know, like I think most developers would prefer not to do switch statements if they can. If they can create an object with methods on it that have all of your actions, like that's great. And then this returns all of your action creators. So these update character and clear character are the same things that I created here, update character and clear character. And these are things that I can use in my components just the same way. So basically, everything in my application, all of the implementation of Redux stay the same between these 2 branches. Basically, the only thing that changes is that you can swap out these 5 files with these 2 files, and this configure store instead of create store, you put all your reducers rather than having to create a combined reducer and import that. So for those that are interested in Redux, definitely dig deeper into that. I'd recommend it because as we move on, I think we're going to try to convert some of our stuff to Redux Toolkit as a stopgap measure, because we have like a lot of different state management approaches in like the same set of components and these features we're working on. And it's really sweet, especially coming from the land of all those different files, to just be able to create one. And really, you can just swap out your reducer and all the implementation stays the same. That's how it was developed. So quick plug there for that. These 2 podcasts talk more about it. I definitely check those out. And if you're interested in learning more about what I talked about in the main stuff of this course, definitely check out Kenzie Dodd's Epic React course. I'll go ahead and close it there and leave time for questions and discussion.